Welcome back to another episode, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for stopping by. I love that as I was watching the viewer count click up then during during the countdown, and then it cut to my face and three people dropped off. If that isn't reassuring of how the day's going, I don't know what is. So welcome, welcome, welcome. Hello to Moksh Patil. I hope I'm saying that right. Welcome. That's a new name. I've not seen you here before. So I hope all is well in your world. What's going on? We all know why we're here. It's an episode dedicated to the fictionalized skills of Sherlock Holmes, which might be, Pascal, you caught me off guard. I must have been almost Kenobi. I like it. Well, he was Ben Kenobi, wasn't he? Welcome. Hello, mate. Yes. So we'll get into the fictionalized stuff in a second, and it is important that we address that. I say important. It's important for those who are looking to develop these kind of skills. Right? If you couldn't care less and you're only tuning in because you really enjoyed Johnny Lee Miller in Elementary, maybe you need a different show. I mean, I love that you're here, and if you're interested, by all means, stick around. But that's not the kind of stuff that we're going to be looking at from the fictionalized side of things. It's about drawing the distinctions between inspiration and how we develop the training and modus operandi around that. But first, the Monographs 2 is nearly drawing to a close. We're getting to that stage in its journey now, where if you go to the actual homepage for it, it says that there are 66 hours left. 66 hours left. And we have a third stretch goal added. A third. We had the first, we smashed it. We had the second, we smashed it. So there's one more left that we haven't reached yet. And we need to get to 100 backers in order for everyone on there to get the Holmes calendar, which is the 2024 Sherlock Holmes page-a-day calendar in digital format at 366 days, actually, as it's a leap year. So there's a lot of fun stuff to look at, and in terms of indulging your inner Holmes nerd, it's full of quotes and trivia and beautiful artistry. We hit 100 backers, everyone gets one of them as well. So we're trying to be as awesome as we can to everybody that's supporting the cause so far. We are 12 away. I think we can do it. I think we can do it, but we can only do it with your help. So if you've not backed the cause already, get on over to Kickstarter. The Monographs 2, get straight in for one of your copies. And if you have backed, you're awesome. just to kind of get that out there for already. And we could definitely do with some more traction sharing this link around. There will be a link in the description for this when it goes out at its scheduled time tomorrow. But this is the live stuff. So there we are. I would be remiss in my duties if I didn't at least inform you about the book that I'm flogging. I'm not really flogging it. It's well, I suppose I am. Really, it depends on your interpretation of trying to get people interested in it. So that's enough of that stuff, because as you well know by now, I'm not a salesman. I tell you about the kind of stuff that I'm up to, and if you want to join in, amazing. We'd love to see you. And if you don't, I'll never know, because you just don't join in. That's one of the joys of the internet. Were this a face-to-face conversation, it'd be entirely different in that scenario. Pascal, I've just seen someone else joined in. Hello to Angel Destroyer. What a great name. Pascal backed it in the first 30 minutes that it went out. Now, if that isn't support, I don't know what is. Right, we need more Pascals in the world. So, let's move on. The fictionalized skills of Sherlock Holmes, and it's something that popped into my head as an aspect for discussion with some of the conversations that I've been having through the week with a few of the folks that I'm teaching. Getting caught up in the number of observations that they have in their head, whether it's right, whether it's wrong, how it's relating to the situation. They can't think this quickly. They can't think that's, you know, all of these differing connotations about the skills that exist and how they relate to the world that we find ourselves in, right? Because it's one thing to say that you've seen this on the wall, this on the wall, this and this that all exists there, but what does it mean? There is a world of difference between saying there's a bunch of photos and portraits and things on the wall as there is to knowing the details between those lines that exist, right? So that's really what we're looking into with this. And as most people that come to this podcast have an affinity of sorts for these types of skills, by and large, we take some sort of inspiration. Not strictly, I'm going to live like this fictional character because, right, we live in the real world, but some sort of inspiration of how these things translate between the two genres. It's all very, very well and good looking at somebody and saying, I'm going to deduce this situation in the same vein that he did. What is that? What does it mean? So there are a number of fictionalized elements that we need to look over in order to make sure that we understand how directly applicable this type of stuff is towards real life, right? And it's one of the things that I first started thinking about when the whole Mind Palace ruse was first being made popular by BBC Sherlock. Like it was this whole big thing that we do, and there's this dancing and movement involved, and it paints the palace technique as this wonderfully immersive, seemingly never-ending feature. And whereas it can be an immersive, seemingly never ending feature, but I can be in mine right now as I'm talking to you to find all of this information that I want to talk to you about. You know, so there are these things and these elements that we have to look at in terms of its reality, and that's where the skewered moments first popped in with the difference between BBC Sherlock's Memory Palace and an actual one. The aim of the game shouldn't be for your, in my opinion, the aim of the game for your Memory Palace shouldn't be for it to be, as full and glorious as some kind of sprawling Florentine house. You need to fill it with the right choice of wood. Good evening, Craig. And though the right choice of wood does teeter on smut in certain dark corners of the internet, it's directly correlated towards the original quote: "A man's brain is originally like an empty attic, and he chooses to fill it with such lumber as he sees fit." We don't just need to fill it with everything. When we take into the nature of memory consolidation, a memory palace should be as empty as we can make it because we've used everything that's in there, right? This is the utilitarian notion of the information that we need to bring with us. Do we really need to memorize the bus schedule if it is that we take a bus once in a blue moon? Depends on your purpose. If you're doing it for training, fair enough. But in terms of a storage capacity for your memory palace, arguably, you don't really need. I keep catching a glimpse of the ring light in my glasses, and it's it's kind of robbing my focus that way around. So let's look at a couple of things that can have the possibility to skewer one's perception of how these skills translate into the real world, right? And this is with a wheelbarrow full of salt, not just a pinch, right? Take the obvious for me, because I'm not really a big fan of the Guy Ritchie franchise. Holmes could absolutely handle himself. You know, single stick boxer, bare knuckles, baritsu, all well within the wheelhouse of Holmes. But whereas you watch something like the Guy Ritchie stuff, and it skewers the intellectualized capacity of Holmes's approach towards the work that he does is changed in favor of action and adventure. Now that's purely the kind of genre of film that's being made in that particular notion, but it didn't have to be Sherlock in that scenario. So you look at the way that not necessarily single stick boxing, but fighting in general translates towards the real world, right? There's a number of martial artists that follow the podcast. There's a number of martial artists that exist in the world that will know. And not, outside of the realms of martial arts, the boxers, anyone pretty much within the realm of combat in that way round will know the difference between a fight that's just not me for sick. Brilliant. Moksh Patil. What's happening exactly? I'm new here. Well, Moksh, you've kind of stumbled upon a podcast that discusses the reality of the skill set of Sherlock Holmes, and if that wasn't apparent by the kind of adornments that are around, then the deductive prowess needs to be worked on, mate. So, I mean, you're welcome. Stick around by all means, but if it's not for you, not a problem. But that's what we're talking about. Anyway, you can look at combat, no matter how real they try and make it on a television program. It's not really entertaining. But if you look at training for reality, you have to take into the notion that if you're going to study a martial art and you train for reality within a martial art, you're still training for reality within a box. Right? You're still training for reality within a box. And this is something Bruce Lee spoke about a lot as well and wove into his training applications. You look at somebody having a boxing match versus some CCTV footage of a street fight. Worlds apart. Worlds apart. No matter how many rules there are or aren't within the realms of mixed martial arts or kickboxing or boxing or whatever kind of stylized combat, there are still rules that exist in that domain. When you move it into a situation where anything is possible, the training patterns become different. So too can be said of the way in which we observe things around us. Holmes focusing on his intellectual capacity, right? Again, the one that sticks out for me, it sounds like I'm picking on BBC Sherlock. There are others, but the one that sticks out for me is in season 3. Forgive me. I will have to keep watered a lot because essentially talking to myself for an hour and having a bit of a sore throat, it's kind of a challenge. But BBC 3, that's entirely incorrect. BBC Sherlock, season 3, episode 1, Sherlock's return. In order to kind of getting back into the swing of things, he walks into the restaurant, sees a small fleck of white powder on the waiter's shoulder, who then receives a text message and proceeds to say, "You better get that because your missus has just gone into labour." What? That's like you guys looking at these over here and immediately deducing my place within a jazz trio. That's the connection. There are far too many variables to consider towards this notion. And the reason I'm using this vehicle to try and help the understanding around the reality of these things is because I don't know what exposure you have to training materials when you're listening to this, right? There are those that follow along with this kind of thing who, Amazon doesn't deliver to their area. They don't have good internet connection, so they're relying on books that they get for the local library and the stuff that they see on TV. Right? We still have to bring in some realm of guide and control to what it is that we do. So that's where the initial consideration is in that scenario, right? If you'd seen these, right, you might recognize them as harmonicas, you might not. But what else does that connect to? And then what else does that connect to? And then what else does that connect to? It's a little bit like one of those spider diagrams, like you see with family trees and things as well. You start with the two parents, and then it comes down to more kids, and then 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 more kids, and you just keep putting out more chairs. Once you've gone far enough, then you assess the variables in terms of its connection towards that situation. To go through all of them that quick is not something that we human beings are capable of. Right? It's similar to some of the things you see in Psych. When he memorizes the serial number on a bill in one of the episodes where I think her character's name is Lindsay Lycan. She's a psychic with the Treasury Department, and she's the fake and this kind of thing. But he'd memorized the serial number faster than anyone can read it, right? And that's even with applying, even down to Simon Reinhardt's a memory system for numbers that takes in great swaths under one picture. You still have to look at it and still process it, and that type of speed to be able to do that is not conducive to reality in that moment. So this is why we have to start bringing these things back down to reality. And I'm going to give you a brief example with that, right? So I have the screen set up. It should be changing over. Come on, there we go. Marvelous. Now you see it in these kinds of situations where the genius will wander around the house, look around, and then come up with a wealth of information. It is akin to this, right? That would be opening the fridge door, popping your head in, and having a look at what's there. Though it is possible to look into somebody's fridge and get a deep insight into towards the kind of lifestyle that they lead with the items that are kept in there, this type of exposure is not long enough unless you are opening the fridge to look for one particular thing. Right, which I suppose Mrs. Hudson, when she went to the fridge in BBC Sherlock, she wasn't expecting to see a head in there or thumbs at one stage. This is where the kind of standout principle was birthed around this. You need to take time in order to process these particular things. And then we get into the volume of detail, right? So even if it was that you looked at that, you might say, well, it's not very full. Right, it's not very full. And also, you might say the fridge was not that big. Now, the impression that is given from these particular shows is kind of the inverse of the same properties, in that you can look into something that quickly and take in everything, so the volume of information you get is huge, or you're able to read a lot of information between those two particular scenes, right? You're able to read the majority of the details between the small amount of observations that you make. And this is where being a human takes over. There are uh, and again, it's why I'm so passionate about training mindset and thinking about the training opportunities around that. I wrote a blog post on it the other day that seemed to kind of stir up a lot of conversation and a lot of people. It was great fun. There's a side note for another day. If you want to check it out, Omniscient Insights on the blog on there. Anyway, you might look at that, and as a human, you might go, well, okay, so the fridge wasn't very full and it's not that big. So what? You need to look at going with what you have rather than thinking about what you don't. That's job one of getting your mindset correct for the proper application of these kinds of deductive reasoning channels that you can pin together. Right? You're not going to look into somebody's pocket and rip apart their entire life. You're not going to look at their shoelaces and know if they've been cheating on their wife, this kind of thing. You can look at the basics here and go, well, okay, the fridge wasn't that big. Okay, what does it take to get a fridge? Or, you know, if you're from the UK, cash monies. So if not that much money is going towards the fridge, what does that tell you about their economic position? Right? If the fridge wasn't that full, what does that tell you? Either they have no use for lots of food, or it's just before shopping and stocks are running low. So you could look at that and say, rather than it just being one fridge, or it's the size of it, you can look at it and get to know potential ideas for economic standing, potential ideas towards where they fall within the class system of that particular area, which would tell you an insight into the kind of job prospects and opportunities that are available for people that exist in that area. And it all connects more and more and more and more. We as human beings, we go through a number of processes in order to decide what's relevant and what isn't. And this is why Sherlock's connection here is such a strong one. It's because he doesn't decide relevancy until he's explored everything. The nature with which he explores things is the fictionalized property in this particular area. Just seen a couple of comments that's coming in. The volume implies regular use and resupply of your fridge. Totally. Fullness is relative to one's perspective. Again, fully. Right? That's a very important point about perspective as well. It's something we're going to come back to in a second. How much detail can you get with that speed? Right? We'll come back. Two very good questions. Again, we'll come back to that as well. But there is another side that pops up from this. It's something that Pascal mentioned. I've got a sneeze coming. Try and get rid of that. All these bright lights aren't going to help. My daughter says I've got the most aggressive sneeze as well. Perception, right? One man's smart is another man's dirty. One man's rich is another man's average. One man's healthy lifestyle is another man's boring lifestyle. And so on and so on. It's about your connection to what it exists in that moment. And these are the important questions that you would have to ask. Okay, so we brought up fridge size. But what constitutes the size of the fridge in that particular moment? Then you would have to know about this particular element. You would have to know about the many differing available options that exist in order to quantify based on the number rather than your perception of what exists as a big fridge and what exists as a small one, and so on and so forth. Right? Perception is key towards your understanding in a moment of whether you are looking at something objectively or whether you're looking at something through some lens of a personal bias, however thin it might be. And this, again, connects to one of the angles that's brought up throughout many a Holmes interpretation, not necessarily the original Conan Doyle ones, but Holmes as this unbeatable, infallible, impervious machine of information. False. We as human beings, we're wrong all the goddamn time. We just work towards making sure that those moments that we are wrong or miss things are fewer and farther between. So if it is that you looked at this and then went, well, it's a fridge. Okay, so you can walk away from that house knowing they have a fridge. They're not that poverty stricken that they're seeking other modes of cooling their food. It's a great piece of information to work with. Who told you that it wasn't? You did. You did. Infallibility. I've no idea if that's spelled right. Infallibility. Can humans have this? No, we can't. So this is why I encourage most people who come to me for lessons. That one of the first things that I tell them: get used to missing things. Get used to being wrong. The more you're used to this, you'll understand the concept that wrong doesn't exist. Not here. Reasoning is fluid. Observation is fluid. It keeps going. The only thing that stops that is you. That's the only thing. So when you look at something as arbitrary as a fridge, you've got all these items here, all these here, all these here, all these here, all this here, all this here, all this here, all this here, and some stuff in the bottom drawer that you can't even see. So you look at all this, and there's a connection towards economic standing. Right? You can look at this particular can over here, and if you have an assessment of its cost, that gives you a base level for the kinds of things that they're bringing in there. Right? So how much money do they have? How it's organized, but because I'm not going to fit organized in this space, how tidy they are. Perception of tidiness is another thing that exists in that area as well. You get then more things about their health and therefore the lifestyle this person leads. And all in all, added up, the perception of whether you can look into a seemingly arbitrary everyday thing and see into somebody's life or not is a choice for you to make based on how you let your mind make these connections. Okay? So when we look at this, emotions have to play a part. And that's another thing that isn't very real about some of the portrayals of Sherlock. He's portrayed as this being of calculable entities, devoid of emotions, almost pure logic. False. Right? False. We as humans, I mean, Sherlock himself isn't, but we as humans, the second we hit the moment of being purely logical, as in like dictionary definition of pure, we become a robot. We become a robot in that way. Pascal just adding, can it give you an idea of where the person lives? Country like, sure. Country like, sure. But if you were looking at just this, and you are looking for connections towards um, anything more local than a town, these types of things, you're looking for local businesses. So it would be anything in this kind of area. If it was locally sourced in any particular way, you could get that as well. And we were coming up to it as well, but frogs are flat, just mentioned as well. You also get, I'm not going to fit it in, relationships, family, and the size of it that exists. Now, if you look at everything that we've just gone through that can be seen in this area, you need time to process that. You're not going to open the fridge and take in all of that after a few seconds. It ain't going to happen. There is too much for you to itemize and process in that way. So, this is why we base our training around taking in more and more over shorter periods so we connect to the strength of mind in our emotions, so that we're not looking at something and going, oh, I only saw two things, therefore it's shit and doesn't mean anything. You're not fit enough to make that call until you've explored it, right? And the same thing, you need practice in seeing connections of an economic standing towards a family standing towards a health stand. Like, say for example, there are, I haven't counted, but let's say 50 fad diets that exist. I'm sure there's probably more. There might be less, but let's say 50 for now, just to put a nice round number on it. For you to look at that and know that this particular fad diet connects towards what you see in there, you've got to have knowledge of those 50 fad diets. Now, does it make sense for you in your life to stick that kind of information in a memory palace based on your role and exposure towards the relevance of that kind of information? If you're a personal trainer, absolutely it does, right? If you are, a lorry driver, probably not, right? Probably not. So you want to focus more on what it is that you are using in the earlier stages. The longer you use this, and you can definitely start to add in some obscure things if it is you want to test your retention of your memory palace. But this is nothing to do with your connection to how you see things in the moment. Right, so these kinds of things all play a part together. The speed at which things are seen, processed, or deduced, bring it back to a human level. The emotionless side of things ain't gonna happen, right? I know more than enough people that have tried to tell me, they don't care about something or it doesn't bother them or what, right? I was talking to one of my friends at the gym the other day, right? And he was trying to tell me that he is, he had a good day at work, and he's just tired, and we were doing our pull-ups at the time, and in that moment everything about him was just somebody that was tired. We were at the gym, which connects to somebody being tired. He'd done a long day at work, which connects to somebody being tired. But then to say things like, oh, I don't care, which he did, you care enough to have said that. You care enough to have said everything else that came before that. You might not care a lot, but you care, right? Emotions can influence the way we think and process things at any time for anyone, right? Even somebody as on the spectrum as me and a bunch of other people I know. We are arguably more emotional than a lot of neurotypical people, because when these types of patterns that we have are broken, it completely fucks with us, right? These things can creep up and are a moment of everyday life that we should, in my opinion, be taking stock of when we're trying to develop this particular skill set. Exactly. I'm going to pop that on the screen. Yeah, like I care about. I do, in a weird way. Right? That argument can be made. For anyone that doesn't know, he really annoys me. Just putting it out there. So, let's have a look at this. I wonder if it'll go straight away. Oh, there's buffering happening. Patience. Boom. Right, so this is mimicking walking through a room at the similar kind of pace that you would walk through a room. Now, if you were to look at that and process every single item that could be there, you'd be there forever. There's far too much. There's far too much. And yet, looking at that gets you connections. There's a message screen up. This is very busy and doesn't have a lot of order. There's a lot of variations to the items on here. There's a big collection of Marvel stuff over here, and there's a varied collection of camera equipment on the floor. As opposed to looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, and all these little bits and things that exist around. We can hone in through connections and patterns if you practice spotting and connecting patterns in that way. Right-handed, absolutely. Mouse on this side, good catch. Could be a workplace fridge. I'm going to put this on as well, just because it's the first time anybody's mentioned this. Could be a workplace fridge. The cling wrap is odd. Sorry if I'm spamming. Don't apologise for spamming. You're not spamming. In short, you're getting involved, and I like it. Get involved. And in terms of the cling wrap in the fridge, for what goes on in there, makes it easier to peel. If you didn't know, right? Spoiler alert: that was my fridge. Right, that was my fridge. It was from sometime last year. I can't be bothered to find the information in the palace. It's there, but it will take a few moments, and it's not even relevant. It was from last year. Anyway, so this is what exists when we look at the room, right? And there's so much going on. There's this on the back of the chair. That was curious. You know, let me stop at the table. There it is. So there's 1, 2 water bottles. Why would there be 2 water bottles? There's a food bowl there. There's a Mac laptop there. There's a camera case bag here. There's a dog toy here. There's weights over here. Right? Now you could spend that same amount of time just looking at this area as you could the whole room. When you get these things connected towards reality, what it reveals to you, or rather what I'm hoping it would reveal to you in the moment, is a connection towards purpose. What is your purpose for looking at anything? Right? Even if it is that you're just training. What are you training for? What are you hoping to develop? So these fictionalized elements of Sherlock's skill have a solid place in reality, just not in the same way. There is an individualized concept for the working of any cerebral skill, right? If you line up every guitar player in the world, they might all be able to play the same song, but they will each think about it in a different way. The same is said of observing a room. I might observe the room in a connection to different patterns than you, and vice versa. Does that mean my way's right and your way's wrong? No. We'll both get information to work with from non-verbal properties. It might be that the patterns I'm used to working with don't connect to your purpose for being there. Right? So this is what I'm saying in terms of there being no right or wrong. These fictionalized elements influence the way we emotionally connect to our skills in the moment, which isn't anywhere near as hippified as it sounds. It can just mean a brief moment where you went, fuck, I missed that. If that becomes a reflex, that becomes a poor behavior that harms how cognitively present you are and can also influence how much information you're able to take in. If this reflex of beating yourself up starts to become more and more and more and more and more, right? So there we go. A brief look at the fictionalized elements, and it gave me a little chance to play with my cool toy of, look, I can draw glasses back onto myself. Ah, silly. I'm a grown man, sort of. Right, guys, I'm going to love you and leave you. Thank you very much for your time, your focus, your grey matter, your interest, your skills, and above all, for playing along in the comments. Right? We'll do more of these as we move forward. But yeah, any other questions? Anything that you'd like to see explored on the podcast in the future? Let me know in the comments section, or reach out at any stage through any kind of the social media channels that I have. I'm on a bunch of them. You could probably find me somewhere. um, you could probably find me somewhere. And yeah, so if anything else, I wish you a wonderful morning, evening, good night, wherever you are, because we go out around the world. And until next time, have a good one, and I'll see you soon.